Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new, welcome to my channel. I am Jamie Beth. Today we're going to do another story time and makeup, and that is where I put on makeup in front of you while I tell you something that is either spooky, scary, paranormal, supernatural, all kinds of weird. And today's story is going to be about the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Now, I have come across this asylum multiple times while researching other videos, and I do think I mentioned it in one other video, and I purposely left it out in others just because I knew I wanted to talk about this particular asylum a little more in depth. This asylum is huge. The main building of this asylum is absolutely enormous, and then there are other buildings around it all on the property, such as a woman's ward, a ward that was for the criminally insane, a hospital. I think there's something else and I don't remember what it was, but we'll get more into that as I start with the story. So that is what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to jump right into the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. So the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was supposed to be a place of peace and restoration, but it soon developed into madness and destruction. Deep in the heart of West Virginia, surrounded by sweeping grounds and green lawns, there is a beautiful long building with a tall steeple in the center. It looks like an expensive boarding school or an attractive weathered mansion. The asylum wasn't always a nightmarish facility. In fact, when it was commissioned in the early 1850s, its conception marked one of the first hopeful developments in centuries for mental patients. The building was the brainchild of Thomas Kirkbride, a doctor and crusader for the mentally ill, who founded what would in time be known as the American Psychiatric Association. Kirkbride built on the foundation established by famous reformer Dorothy Dix, who sought to disabuse people of their misconceptions about mental illness. Namely, that it was this shadowy, irreversible condition best treated in darkness with force and physical restraint. Speaking as the science behind some of Kirkbride's medical ideas, his ideas led to a more humane and all-around more effective plan of treatment for the residents of his asylums than any other practice in the area. Era. One of the things he emphasized was the importance of light and fresh air, suggesting that asylums be built as long halls with 12-foot ceilings, plenty of windows, and ventilation that allowed for cross breezes. He also emphasized freedom. Mental patients, he felt, should be allowed to roam as much as possible and find stimulation for their minds. They would behave better, not worse, if given more control of their own lives. When it opened its doors in 1863, the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was renamed the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane, and it was a model of Kirkbride's ideas. It could house 250 patients, each with their own comfortable room. Skilled stonemasons had been brought in from Germany and Ireland to contribute to the architecture that featured the wide open windows, giving patients access to natural light and fresh air. The grounds were magnificent and sustainable, including a working farm, dairy, waterworks, a gas well, and a cemetery. It was, as architect Richard Snowden Andrews had intended it to be, a self-sufficient, state-of-the-art facility designed to make patients feel at home, well cared for, and restored. Construction was interrupted by the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. And the partially built hospital and surrounding grounds became Camp Tyler for the Union. The completed southern wing of the asylum was used as barracks, and the main foundation served as a stable for the horses. Following the admissions of West Virginia becoming a state in 1863, that's when the hospital was renamed the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. In 1864, Confederate raiders stripped the asylum of all the food and clothing intended for the first group of patients. The first patients were admitted in October of 1864. The very first patient was a housewife who had domestic trouble. In the early days, asylums were seen as repositories for more than just the insane. People were committed for ridiculous reasons, such as laziness, religious enthusiasm, menopause, superstition, domestic trouble, masturbation, and tuberculosis. Asylums were often the dumping grounds for society's unwanted. Interestingly enough, the asylum offered money to anyone who dropped off a patient, many of whom showed no signs of mental illness when they were first committed. In the beginning, the hospital was largely self-sufficient. They raised their own vegetables, maintained a dairy herd, and operated an ice plant. The nearby coal mine supplied fuel and heat, and there was a reservoir for water. All of the patient's clothing, curtains, and fabrics were made at Weston, as well as fine quality mattresses and most of the institutional furniture. The center unit is 4 stories high. This section was originally designed to house offices and personnel, and at one time even had such features as a large ballroom. More than 700 patients were housed in the building, which was 1,295 feet long and contained 2.5 miles of hallways. The walls were 2.5 feet thick, dense enough to muffle the screams of even the most tormented souls. 19th century healing tactics were barbaric, some of which included bloodletting and insulin coma therapy. Seclusion cells and confinement cribs were utilized to control violent patients. Unfortunately, there were innocent victims of the asylum due to misdiagnosed conditions and unfortunate situations. Many spent their entire lifetime at the asylum only to end up in an unmarked grave on a lonely hillside. Changes were constantly being made. A women's auxiliary was built in 1890, and 2 years later, the 20-foot front lawn was enclosed by a Victorian wrought iron fence. A gas well was drilled into the grounds in 1902, making the facility even more self-sufficient. The hospital's name was again changed to the Weston State Hospital in 1913. In the early 20th century, a developing attitude that treatment should be more directed to maintenance than in the attempt to rehabilitate. And a continual lack of funds plagued the hospital for many years. Several fires were set by patients over the years, including a large fire in October of 1935, which ravaged the 4th floor of the hospital. Remarkably, no one was killed, and the wing was rebuilt later on. In 1938, the asylum was called home to 1,661 patients. That year, a survey was done, and it showed that the hospital housed epileptic, alcoholics, drug addicts, and individuals that couldn't be educated. In 1949, the hospital had around 1,800 patients. That year, the Charleston Gazette reported that the facility had poor sanitation, insufficient furniture, lighting, heating in much of its complexes. At its peak in the 1950s, the hospital's population reached 2,400 patients, more than 10 times the number built to accommodate these patients. It was likely one of the worst times to be a patient in this hospital, with it being overcrowded and understaffed. It, no doubt, could make even the most sane souls lose their minds. Anyone who complained or acted out was subjected to solitary confinement, chained to walls, and left in empty rooms for a month on end. During these many years, a number of medical practices such as ice water baths, seclusion cells, electroshock therapy, and lobotomies were commonly used on patients. At one point, one of the favored procedures that were used extensively was the ice pick lobotomy, which is also called the transorbital lobotomy. This crude procedure utilized a 1 or 2 prong device which was driven through the orbital socket of the eye and into the brain with a sharp blow. So what they would do They take a pointy thing, put it right in where your eye, almost like where your tear duct is. Then they take a hammer and hit it so it would go into your eye. Sounds great, doesn't it? The permanent damage caused was thought to relieve some of the patient's more severe symptoms. In 1952, one doctor alone performed 228 such lobotomies during a 2-week period in West Virginia. They abruptly named it Operation Ice Pick. But the real problem was overcrowding, and an inability to handle the large population led to an increase in violence. There were several cases of patients killing each other. In one instance, 2 patients hung one of their fellow patients using a set of bed sheets. And when this patient didn't die, they then used a metal bed frame to crush his head. Even the staff were not immune to the violence, and several of the female employees were raped. One evening, a nurse went missing and her rotting body was found 2 months later at the bottom of an unused stairwell. In order to deal with some of the more violent and uncontrollable and severely mentally ill patients, it is said that they would keep these patients in metal cages. In 1985, the Charleston Gazette again exposed the asylum, reporting that the court-ordered inspectors found the facility to be dirty and unkept, many of the patients being left naked and confined to dirty wards. 7 years later, in 1992, the worst news rocked the asylum when the Charleston Gazette again reported those horrendous conditions inside the asylum. That same year, a patient named George Edward Bodie died after a fight with another patient. Another patient, Brian Scott B., committed suicide, and his badly decomposing body was not found for 8 days. The hospital was forced to close in 1994 due to changes in treatments of patients and the physical deterioration of the facility. Afterward, the facility stood vacant for years. The hospital was auctioned off in 2007, and a man named Joe Jordan bought the 242,000 square foot building for $1.5 million. Today, it is open for guided historic and paranormal tours, as well as even ghost hunts. The central section of the main building has a museum in it and some restored period rooms from the 1870s and 1960s. One of the patient wards has been restored, but the remaining 23 are largely untouched. The endless decayed hallways and vacant patient rooms, including isolation cells and rusted rings once used to chain the most violent, create an extremely eerie atmosphere. Tales of hauntings and unearthly spirits lurking within the building and grounds started long before it ceased to be a hospital. After a few decades, the reports of hauntings and the sounds of restless souls became a commonplace. In fact, some workers were said to have stayed only a few days, quitting after hearing inexplicable noises, such as the squeaky wheels of gurneys rolling down a tiled hallway. Thousands were committed to the asylum over the years, and many unfortunately died there. Over 2,000 people are buried in the cemetery. The spirits are numerous and range from Civil War era ghosts to children to ex-patients and staff. Murderers, rapists, and other violent offenders are said to dwell in the building, along with the others whose only crime was depression or substance abuse. Sightings include staff and visitors seeing ghostly figures walking around the hallways at night and glimpsing shadowy figures at all hours. One doctor even reported that a spirit followed her home and continues to trouble her to this day. Now her spirit wanders the hallways where people have been pushed up against walls and have heard whistling sounds emanating from the hallways. On the first floor of the building, which is also called the Civil War Wing and is the oldest part of the building, is said to lurk a former patient by the name of Ruth. When Ruth was alive, she was known to hate men. She would even throw things at them. She just hated men, and it was unknown why she hated men so much. It is said that she wanders the hallways. She'll push people up against walls, and people have heard her whistling along the hallways when no one was there. In Ward 2 on the second floor, a couple of violent events occurred. In one room, a man was stabbed 17 times by another patient. In another room, 2 patients committed suicide by hanging themselves from curtain rods. Shadowy figures have often been seen on at least one occasion, and an EVP captured someone saying, "Get out." The third floor is where those 2 patients tried to hang another patient, and when he didn't die, they took a bed frame and crushed his skull. Another ghost by the name of Big Jim is also said to maintain a permanent residence on this floor, as well as a nurse called Elizabeth. Other occurrences on this floor include doors that close by themselves, fleeting glimpses of apparitions, shadowy figures, and a number of strange noises that have been caught on EVPs. Located on the 4th floor is another well-known spirit, a child named Lily, who sits patiently in a room filled with toys, waiting for someone to play with her. Wearing a white dress and said to be 9 years old, Lily likes to play games with visitors and staffs. As toys move around all on their own, and music from a music box is said to play all by itself. Although Lily seems to be pleasant enough, there are other more sinister spirits that seem to linger on the 4th floor, including a black mass object and a strange apparition called the Creeper that crawls along the floor. I don't know about you, but I would probably not go on the 4th floor, regardless if there was a cute little child spirit. Another ghost that is also seen on the 4th floor is a soldier named Jacob, who is said to just stroll along the hallways. Numerous unearthly sounds have also been heard, including screams coming from inside the electroshock room, banging, mysterious slamming doors, throaty moans, ominous breathing, and hysterical laughter coming from empty rooms. And lastly, we have objects that move by themselves and an undeniable feeling that you are being watched. So that is the story for today, the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. I don't know about you. I do kind of want to take a trip here and take one of those ghost tours just to see what the inside of this place looks like. I mean, it does sound a little creepy, don't get me wrong, and it does sound a little scary. What do you guys think? Would you visit this and go on a ghost tour? What are your thoughts and opinions? Please let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed today's story time. If you did, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you are notified of all of my upcoming videos. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.